Broadcasting live on the UnitedWest.org AM radio network, simulcasting on DirecTV, iHeartRadio, Roku, and the World Wide Web. This is Enemies of the State with Tom Trento.
All right, it's Tuesday, July 7th, 2015. And let me tell you, if, hey, Mark Damon, if any of us win the lottery, the Florida lottery or the Powerball or anything like that, and we want to take our money and invest it somewhere and do something with it, we got to hire Iranians. We got to hire Iranians to do the negotiating for us. At the last minute in Vienna, they go, oh, wait a minute. We forgot one thing. All those regular weapons, non-nuclear weapons, just the typical ones that we're prohibited from having, we got to throw that in the deal now, and we get all of those things back today. So on the 7th, this has been such a foobar that we had to get one of the world's experts on some of these issues in studio with us today to discuss Iran, to discuss nuclear problems worldwide with, I don't know, a different way of hurting people and harming people. Correct. In fact, he was on not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, our special guest who is in studio, but he was cruising in front of our facility. We saw him, we said, Dr. Peter Pry, come on inside.
That's right.
Sit down, put your shirt and tie on, and here he is, live in the studio.
Tom, thank you so much for having me.
Good to have you here. We had you on last week, or a couple of weeks ago it was, and you were sitting in front of the painting that you did, which was great. It was the 70th anniversary of
Operation Barbarossa.
Barbarossa, exactly, that fiasco in World War II. And I don't know, you happen to be driving around in front of us here. We got you in the studio now.
Well, thank you again, in this auspicious time to have a discussion about the nuclear program of Iran. We mentioned before, I think now I'm not sure when the deal is supposed to close now. They keep moving the date. Last week it was supposed to conclude on July 9th. And the
30th, actually. Remember the 30th originally?
Right.
Yeah.
And then it slid to July 9th, and now it's probably later. But I thought that was interesting on July 9th because that's the 53rd anniversary of the Starfish Prime high-altitude nuclear test where the United States discovered the EMP phenomena, which is why Iran wants the bomb in the first place. So that would be really auspicious to have the deal concluded on July 9th.
I want to get into that. Starfish Prime?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to find out what Starfish Prime is all about in a little bit. But a lot for today. We're going to take a look at the negotiating tactics of the Iranians. We're going to look at 8 or 9 different ways that they have totally turned Ernesto Moritz, the long-haired PhD physicist, upside down in their negotiations. How John Kerry is just completely irrelevant. I mean, the guy has become irrelevant in terms of having some sort of considered debate with these folks. They're very, very good, the Iranians. And by timeline, we're going to go back a few years in our timeline to take a look how we got to this situation. But the most current timeline was the conclusion of the negotiations by June 30th. And the U.S. Congress got involved back at the beginning of this year and said, look, you've been dragging this thing on. We got to do something with Iran one way or the other. And if you do not have a concluding negotiated agreement by the 30th, then we're inserting ourselves in this. And through the negotiation between the administration and the U.S. Congress at the beginning of the year, it was okay. If we don't have it done by the 30th, we'll have it to you 9 days later, thus the 9th. And U.S. Congress said, okay, we want a 30-day review on the 30th. We'll give you grace time. We'll give you 9 days, actually 10 days, but they need to have it in by the 9th to review all the material. A lot of junk that the negotiating team of the U.S. has to hand over from the P5+1. And we missed the deadline of the 30th. So the United States said, okay, we got to have it by the 7th, have a little bit of leeway for the paperwork to make it over so that the 30-day deadline, Peter, the 30-day review period is in play. But the U.S. Congress, in their wisdom, even though their whole bill, the Coker bill, is foolish, you can't beat Obama, the 30-day window jumps to 60 days if the administration doesn't deliver paperwork by the 10th, or in this case, the 9th. Mm-hmm. So, but the Iranians have said, that's your problem. That's your self-imposed deadline. We don't have those deadlines in terms of what we need to do for our people. So today, the second deadline for the conclusion has been passed. Now we're into the 9th, 2 more days. Anybody want to roll the dice? By the way, Mark or Damon or Dr. Pry, got a little bit of trivia.
Yes.
Deadline.
Oh, where does it come from?
Where's it come from?
Newspaper
Don't
world.
Google it. Don't Google
Newspaper
it.
world.
That's what I was going to say, newspaper world.
I don't know. I might guess during one theory I've heard, I've read this, was that in the prisoner of war camps in the Confederate and Union side during the Civil War, there was a barrier you weren't supposed to cross, or you'd get shot by the guards, and that's what the deadline comes from. But I don't know if that's accurate.
Wow, that's really strange. But he's right, ladies and gentlemen.
Wow.
That is where it comes from. There was a prisoner of war camp in Georgia, southwestern Georgia, and a little moat was, the walls were put up in the camp, and there was a little moat about 6 feet. And if you went in there, went over that line, you were dead. And that's where the concept deadline came from. And the idea is, this is it. This is the end. This is it. You're dead if you don't meet this timeline. Well, that's not the case with our administration. It keeps shifting and shifting. But a lot of stuff going on. President Obama scrambling around trying to make sense out of all this. Let's take a step back. And we have the beauty of our show. It's an uninterrupted hour. We're not bothered with commercialism and people paying us money to advertise.
We don't stupid money.
We're
Stupid
purists.
Money, yeah.
We don't want that kind of dirty commercial money.
Dirty money. Yeah.
To advertise junk. We'd rather
Starve.
eat leftovers.
Starve. That's right. Starve. That's right.
And but our audience likes to get to know our subject matter experts, and we delved into a little bit of this with our interview earlier. But who are you, and what is your raison d'etre? What do you want to accomplish in life? If you had a mission, or what is your mission in life? What do you want to leave as a legacy for this world?
Okay. Well, my name is Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, and I'm the Executive Director of the EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security, which is a congressional advisory board, and we're trying to protect the country from electromagnetic-pulse, which I guess we'll get into later, but all weapons of mass destructions and cyber weapons against the civilian critical infrastructures. I also served on the Congressional EMP Commission, the House Armed Services Committee, and worked for years at the CIA. And my my life goal here, if I could get this country protected against EMP, which is the greatest threat that Western civilization faces, not just from man, but Mother Nature can make it too, an EMP from the sun, I would consider my life very well spent. Or even if I was able to lay foundations so somebody else after me could achieve that. I just don't know that we're going to have the time, though. It's sort of a do or die objective, because Iran is either so close or may already have the bomb. North Korea has the bomb. China and Russia have got plans to attack us with EMP. And well, we just missed a natural EMP catastrophe 2 years ago, according to NASA, when a coronal mass ejection that would have potentially kill billions of people.
Wow.
Missed the Earth by just 3 days. And
3 days.
3
yeah,
days?
right. NASA estimates that the likelihood of a Carrington-class geomagnetic superstorm is 12% per decade, which virtually guarantees it will happen in our lifetimes or that of our children. So that's my big goal. This strange thing that even today, after years of preaching about it, since 2008, few people seem to know it, and people who should know about it don't understand it well enough. Maybe it's an uphill battle, but if I could get people educated and get federal and state governments motivated to protect us against that, I would consider my life well spent.
Just to give the people an update on what a coronal mass ejection is, if you look on your screen here, you see the big ball of fire coming out of the side of the sun. And that little bitty dot that looks right down there on the bottom of the screen, right below that coronal mass ejection, that is the Earth. That gives you the size of what we're talking about, of coming this direction. And it's going to hit. It's not a matter. This is really not a matter of if. It is
That
definitely
thing will
when.
fry everybody like a French fry.
There's some global warming for
No,
you.
but just the electromagnetic. The good thing about it is that it's so far away that we don't get the heat from it. But we do get the pulse that comes off that way. The way.
Well, I got a question for Dr. Pry, and it's been plaguing me for many, many years. Go back to that picture, Mark, of the sun.
Go ahead.
How does the sun? What's going on inside the sun that allows it to burn and burn and burn and give us a tan?
Well, it's the sun is basically a gigantic hydrogen bomb, and the process that happens inside the heart of a hydrogen bomb is happening in the sun. It's fusing hydrogen, and it has such a big hydrogen supply that you've basically got an ongoing thermonuclear explosion that's equivalent to billions of hydrogen bombs exploding every second. That's been going on for billions of years.
Yep.
And on occasion, because there are geomagnetic storms inside the sun and on the surface of the sun, what happens is that you will have what a sunspot is. It looks like a cool spot in the sun, but basically it's a hole in the sun that's caused by the geomagnetic fields on the sun, and that hole enables a coronal mass ejection to come out, and it's basically like an enormous cannon that shoots a chunk of the sun out into the space, and the superheated ionized particles, which actually could do great injury to us, but we are protected by the magnetosphere that God in His wisdom put around the Earth. But when this coronal mass ejection slams into the magnetosphere at 1,000,000 miles an hour or more, it deforms the magnetosphere and causes it to wobble around, and that moving magnetic field is what causes the pulse on Earth. A big coronal mass ejection like that's called a Carrington-class coronal mass ejection, because it is so big, it's much bigger than the Earth, and it would cause an EMP everywhere on the Earth all at once. And
On the whole Earth.
Right, and it would cause electric grids and the life-sustaining critical infrastructures to collapse.
Now we run into this sun's electromagnetic pulse all the time, do we not, Doctor? In Northern Lights, is that correct?
There are geomagnetic storms, normal geomagnetic storms that happen every year, and they cause the Northern Lights. But what we're on occasion, we get a geomagnetic storm, that hits at lower latitudes and can cause problems with the electric grid. There was a storm in 1989 called the Hydro-Quebec storm that blacked out half of Canada for a day in 90 seconds. It didn't end civilization or anything, but that was just a run-of-the-mill geomagnetic storm. Our concern is with the rare geomagnetic superstorm that occurs every century or so, like the Carrington event or the 1921 railroad storm. There was a big superstorm in 1921 that happened before the United States was electrified. I mean, that really happened under the Roosevelt administration.
Sure. If there's no electricity, it's a big storm that does nothing.
But if something like that hit us today, according to the National Academy of Sciences, the 1921 railroad storm, if that hit us today, it would cause a blackout that would last 4 to 10 years. It would take that long to repair the damage.
4 to 10 years?
Assuming that we survive. The Congressional EMP Commission estimated that if we had a nationwide blackout that lasted 1 year, probably 9 of 10 Americans would die from starvation, disease, and societal collapse.
I have so many different ways I want to approach this, but 21 minutes after, Tom Trento here, your host, Enemies of the State. Name of our show, we're the United West. Our mission is to defend the United States Constitution, stand with the State of Israel, fight Islamic Jihad, and do the exact opposite of whatever President Obama does. That's our raison d'etre. That's what we're trying to do. And today, on the 7th, which is the second deadline for the termination or completion of the negotiations with Iran, it's been passed, pushed now to probably the 9th, maybe longer. If it gets pushed longer, all that means is that the United States Congress gets 60 days to review it. We're going to check out a couple of the Clarion Project's videos on this superb, insightful, semi-humorous, sarcastic parodies of the absurd nature of this negotiation. But we have an expert, Dr. Peter Pry, in a studio with us. And Dr. Pry, I've used to race automobiles, and you'd go to some of the tracks, and people would fry eggs on their radiators, while they're camping out. How long would it take to fry an egg on the face of the sun?
Probably a nanosecond. It would probably be fried long before you could get it there.
What's the temperature of the sun?
Well, it depends if you're on the interior of the surface. It's probably millions of degrees on the interior of the sun, which is how it can fuse hydrogen and create those thermonuclear explosions. I'd like to make a comment about the so-called deal with Iran. And I certainly agree with the Washington Post on how the worst ever
Wow,
deal.
the Washington Post, what did they say? Where is
Yeah,
that?
the worst agreement in U.S. diplomatic history, and there seems to be a growing consensus on the idea that this is a bad deal. But I want to step back a little further, and there's another way, and this is a serious threat, to our country, and that's just the process that we decided to let the administration go forward with, because, in addition to being an existential threat to our country, because this deal will create the conditions to enable Iran to get the bomb, if they don't have one already. I am one, and we can talk about that later, but I think they've already had the bomb, and I think they've had the bomb for years, and so that this whole thing is a farce. But there hasn't been enough attention paid to the damage done to the Constitution by a Republican Congress deciding to go along with this whole thing as not being a treaty in the first place. This deal is of such consequence to our national security, it certainly rises to the level of being a treaty and requiring the kind of oversight that the founders provided in the Constitution for the making of treaties. And I was just appalled and could hardly believe it that a newly elected Republican Senate would go along and sacrifice their own constitutional authority to have this a treaty, to force they should have done whatever they had to do to force this thing to go through the treaty-making process. I saw this writing in the wall back in the Clinton administration when they got away with this with North Korea. They basically cut a deal with North Korea that the Clinton administration called an agreed framework. And they called it an agreed framework because they didn't want to call it a treaty. Because they knew if they called it a treaty, it would be captured by the constitutional requirement to have congressional Senate oversight on the thing, to examine it. And that agreed framework, it was what gave us a nuclear North Korea. In fact, North Korea had the bomb. And all during those negotiations for the 8 years of the Clinton administration. And they created this fiction that they didn't have the bomb yet, and the media went along with it, even though the then CIA director back in 1995 under the Clinton administration had said, North Korea's already got the bomb. That all got forgotten under this agreed framework, which was all smoke and mirrors. The Clinton
just like this.
Just like this. The Clinton administration was just kicking the ball down the road so some future administration would get the blame. And they didn't want, it was either that or taking some kind of military action to stop North Korea from becoming a nuclear weapons state. And the North Koreans went along with this because because they got all kinds of economic concessions from the United States.
Even though they had it, they played a shell game.
They hadn't perfected their ICBM yet. They used the time so they could work on an ICBM, and they worked on building more bombs so that it would become irreversible. So instead of having a small stockpile, they had a larger stockpile, so it became irreversible. And I think we're doing exactly the same thing and making the same mistake. But when I saw this administration has been calling this deal an agreed framework, just like they called the North Korean thing. And Bill Clinton got away and did damage to the Constitution by taking this off the table for congressional oversight so that the Senate couldn't exercise its treaty-making authority. And that's another dimension to this that doesn't really get enough attention. Going along with the administration and letting them treat this as not a treaty has done lasting damage.
It's done lasting damage in terms of the geopolitics of the situation.
In terms of us being a constitutional republic. I mean, this makes the president even more of a king, where he, on his own authority, can make a deal with a foreign government and cut the Senate, minimize the role of the Senate.
And what it's done, Peter, also is demoralized people like us here at the United West, because we have faith in the system, and we argued up to the 2014 election. So look, the system's not broken. We got to replace 100 people, put the right people in there. We got a very good system. The structure of our republic, our constitutional republic, is good. Get 100 people in there. Well, we got enough people in there to do something, and they didn't do anything. That's so demoralizing.
Yes.
That is completely demoralizing. We're watching going, what are you guys doing? You have the strength of the purse. You could shut the president down. Now you have the Senate and the Congress. What more do you want? And they're stumbling over themselves. Extremely demoralizing. And look, we're internally watching this, but the Persians, who are brilliant people, Iran, these are not Arab camel jockeys as people see the Arabs. The Persians are extremely intelligent, highly educated, and ironically, Mohammad Javad Zarif, the chief negotiator for Iran, and I lived on the same block in Denver and went to school at the same time, different schools. I was at seminary, Denver Seminary, on University Boulevard, and he was a mile down the street at University of Denver doing some degree work there in the 80s. Man. And I was on campus all the time discussing all kinds of issues. May have run into the guy. But he is an expert on American politics, American psychology, and the Persians have understood Curry's frame of thinking, the president's frame of thinking, Wendy Sherman, who gave North Korea the whole game, and the Clarion Project, in understanding this mismatch, put together a phenomenal little video on how to con America. Now take a look at this, and we want you to comment on this, because this is what you're referring to with our Republican legislature, demoralizing Republicans and moving toward defeat against a very evil regime. Take a look at this little...
This is the leader of Iran. He seems to want a nuclear bomb. This is the leader of America. He doesn't think that's such a good idea. So to figure it all out, they tried to make a deal. Welcome to a short instructional video, how to con America and get a nuclear bomb. Okay, so let's say you're Iran and you need to run a con on America. Where do you start? Well, the first step in any good con is to earn the trust of your mark. And you can't establish trust when this guy is the president.
I will strike America with an iron fist.
You'll need a bit of a makeover to get the process started. So make sure that this guy gets elected.
Moderate cleric Hassan Rouhani is Iran's new president.
He's known as a reformist.
But is Rouhani really a reformist?
About 470 people have been executed in Iran since he took power.
And they're actually hanging gays right here.
And who's the guy behind the curtain that's really pulling all the strings? The supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei.
The Islamic peoples all over the world chant, "Death to America! Death to America!
Death to America!" This is
Death
our
to
negotiating
America.
partner.
Don't be afraid to lie.
Point 2.
Tell the world your nuclear program is for peaceful purposes.
And note when the
program is exclusively peaceful, has always been and will always remain exclusively peaceful.
when an army goose steps, that's a big clue.
Pursuing peaceful objectives.
Keep repeating your story, and the world will conveniently ignore the fact that the head of the UN Atomic Agency has strong evidence that Iran's nuclear program is not for peaceful purposes.
And that's a
Iran
liberal leftist
has
group. by the way.
carried out activities relevant to the development of nuclear explosive device.
This is a leftist organization.
It is my duty to alert the world.
The next step is the good old bait and switch. Make them believe you're agreeing to reasonable concessions, and then don't. Here's a good example.
Then don't.
In the interim agreement reached
Then
in
don't.
April 2015, Iran said they would allow inspections of all their nuclear sites.
We do not intend to cheat.
That led President Obama to assure the world that
international inspectors will have unprecedented access not only to Iranian nuclear facilities, but to the entire supply chain that supports Iran's nuclear program.
now that they've taken the bait, make the switch.
Tehran has repeatedly stressed that it will not allow inspections of its military facilities.
We made it clear that we will not allow any inspection of any military site.
After the president said, oh, they will.
Yeah. You know, change your mind.
Step 4 is to identify their weakness and exploit it. America believes that diplomacy is the ideal way to solve all major problems.
Diplomacy ends wars, saves lives.
Oh, wars
spreads
ends
freedom
wars.
all around the world.
Bullets
Winning a
can't
war.
defeat an
Diplomacy
ideology.
starts
Because
wars.
America mistakenly believes that Iran shares their values and that they also want peace.
We welcome war with the Americans. The Americans are enemies of the Islamic Revolution of Iran.
Now, because America believes in the goodwill of all people, they'll do almost anything to keep you at the negotiating table. So stay tough, and you'll find that they'll even be willing to move their own non-negotiable terms, their so-called red lines. Originally, America said that Iran must close the Iraq and Fordow nuclear facilities. They said that Iran should stop all nuclear enrichment, and they insisted that Iran should have only 1,500 centrifuges. But because you were tough, Iraq and Fordow will not be closed.
None of those measures include closing any of our facilities.
Because you were tough, you can now continue enriching uranium.
We will continue enriching.
And because you were tough, you get to keep more than 6,000 active
6,000?
centrifuges.
That's there would be
no destruction of centrifuges.
No, not at all.
And if they try to act tough,
If Iran violates the deal, sanctions can be snapped back into place.
you just show them who's boss.
If people are worried about snapback, they should be worried about U.S. violating its obligation and us snapping back. And that is a point that the
they're gonna
United
snap
States
back with
should
a
be
weapon.
seriously concerned about.
Congratulations! With these 4 easy steps, you have successfully conned the United States of America. So, despite your double talk, appalling human rights record, worldwide sponsorship of terror, and your genocidal calls for the destruction of America and Israel, you are now well on your way to getting a nuclear bomb.
Yay!
Congratulations, Iran.
Way to go, Iran. Hey, first of all, Clarion Project, excellent video. They have 7 of them out now. Go to clarionproject.org. Good friends of ours making these fabulous videos. 34 minutes after. Tom Trento, your host, Enemies of the State. Name of the show, in studio, not an enemy, a friend of the United States. In fact, someone who's worked for the United States in his illustrious career. We're discussing the failure of the United States to reach a conclusion on the negotiations with Iran today, which was the second deadline, 30th, now the 7th. Pushing it back to the 9th, that's not going to happen either. And Peter Pry, we just looked at this very insightful little video. I want to get your comments on it. But first, stepping back for a second for our audience here at WSBR Radio and RedStateTalkRadio.com. Where did you go to school? Where'd you learn all this crazy scientific stuff?
Well, I knew what I wanted to do when I was 13, and I read Herman Kahn's on thermonuclear war, and I was hoping, because I saw that as the greatest threat to our civilization. And so if I could make any contribution to helping prevent nuclear war, protect our country from that.
At 13 years
yeah,
old?
At 13.
Okay.
And I would add, I had an interest in that because my family was originally from Russia, and they were on the wrong side during the Bolshevik Revolution. And so we came over to this country in 1921. And so there was always a very strong anti-communist. In fact, my great-grandfather was a general who fought with the whites against the Reds.
Wow.
So we had anti-communism was in our bones. We knew how evil and bad these people were, and had lost many relatives and friends, in Russia. So even before I was 13, I was aware of these things and
sense of history, yeah.
Thinking about these things. But then I went to, so I studied military history. I thought the best training for this was as a historian, and particularly military history. In those days, in the 70s, the idea of strategic studies was actually politically incorrect. It was so politically incorrect there were only like 3 places in the whole country: University of Chicago, University of Southern California, and I think George Washington University had strategic studies programs. But that's what I eventually wanted to do, to get into one of those politically incorrect strategic studies programs. So I had to get my first degree in history, all right? And that provided me, then I wrote my first book on Israel's nuclear arsenal, and that got me into the University of Southern California, where I worked on my next PhD under Bill Van Cleve.
What do you mean, your next PhD?
Well, it was my second degree. My first was in history, and then my second.
Your bachelor's was in history.
No, I got a PhD in history.
What you get a bachelor's in? I mean, you got to start.
Oh, I got a bachelor's degree at.
I got a bachelor's degree.
Right.
I'll blow that one off.
At State University of New York Polytechnic, which is in Utica, Rome, New York. Political science. I was looking at political science.
So you take that, you go for a master's, or
that,
you went right to
a master's in U.S. history.
Same place?
State University of New York at Binghamton.
Oh, Binghamton. I spent a day in jail in Binghamton. Different story. While you were getting your master's, I was in jail for a day. True story. Driving a truck, no less.
And I stayed in their graduate program for history. And then I worked in between, while I was working in Israel's nuclear arsenal.
But now at this point, what's the year right now when you got your master's?
Let's see. When did I get that? I think it was 78, 77, sometime in, I think that was late 1970s is when I got my master's and entered the PhD graduate program.
Same place?
Yeah, State University of New York at Binghamton. And I was working, I had scholarships, but I was also working my way through school. And actually it wasn't really doing it for the money, but I became involved. I had a break in between my graduate studies and my undergraduate studies. That's very important. I should mention that, where I spent about 3 years working in the immigration resettlement program as a consequence of the communist purges that were taking place and the communist takeover of Southeast Asia. You may remember the boat people.
Sure, yeah.
Laotian, Cambodian. Many of these people were allies of the United States. They had fought with us, and now their lives were at risk. They were facing extermination and persecution. Darn, I lost my...
No, it's on your shoulder. Right?
It's on your shoulder.
Tricky little things.
Yeah.
I jam mine in my ear.
So we were, these people were languishing in basically concentration camps in places like Thailand and risking their lives at sea. And we started resettling them into the United States. And so I was part of that, where we would take them and the U.S. government, in its wisdom, would take people who had been Hmong Mountain people, for example, and resettle them in the snow belt of upstate New York. But
well, let's take Somalis and put them in Minneapolis.
Right,
yeah, exactly.
But it took them, they assimilated very quickly. They were
Vietnamese are
business was in their bones.
Amazing.
Right, in one generation, they owned their own businesses and stuff like that, and and were pursuing the American dream, and that. I was already a staunchly anti-communist at that time, but hear, the evidence of my own eyes, not just the stories that my grandparents was telling me. Here was communism on the march again, destroying the lives of good people again. We lost children. I mean, there were people who were under, there was a teenage girl who was an artist, and she would paint pictures of other children being tortured and piles of skulls, under Pol Pot.
Pol Pot's
she had
whole,
been
yeah,
experimented
many
under
people,
Pol
sure,
Pot,
yeah.
and unfortunately we lost her. She ended up hanging herself in the closet, and she couldn't reconcile herself to that horror. And so
you did that for a few years. Then
Yeah.
you worked on your first PhD.
yeah, and then I went to get my next degree, my next PhD in strategic studies under Bill Van Cleve, who had
When did
been-
you write the book on
Israel's nuclear arsenal? I did that when I was working on my undergraduate degree, and continued to work on it, and then published it during those years when I was in the refugee resettlement program.
2 days ago, I started reading A Bomb in the Basement. It's just thick, but
Right.
it's a whole story of very, very interesting book. All right, so you got all this background, this education. Now, how did you? 42 minutes after.
A lot of my expertise, I also have to say, it wasn't from colleges. A lot of these things you don't learn in college, but it was when I went to work for the CIA. And,
how'd you get? Did you seek the position?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah. I seek. In those days, they were growing the CIA. This was under the Reagan administration, and they were actually advertising in the newspapers for people to come and work for the CIA.
That's not very covert.
And right. And and so I went in. I volunteered for it, took their tests, and passed the background examination. Takes over a year to do.
Were
that.
you ever in jail in Binghamton, New York?
No.
Okay.
Well,
No.
he's not qualified to talk about this. Then.
While I was going through the background investigation for the CIA, I had my first government job was actually with a now defunct agency called the U.S. Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, and I was a verification analyst for them. And one of the things we did was we were looking at Soviet compliance or non-compliance with arms control treaties, which is extremely relevant to
Of course.
our present conversation. And then after working for them for a year and 18 months, I started working for the CIA in 1985, and spent a decade there. And they sent me to, I got a certificate in nuclear weapons design. They sent me to the Los Alamos and
Oh,
the nuclear
really?
weapons, and the nuclear weapons lab. So I actually have a diploma from the
Now wait a minute, this is fast.
US
I didn't
Air
know
Force
this
nuclear
about
weapons
you.
lab.
So you got all these, political science and history and strategic studies. You go into the agency and they go, hey, we got a live one here. Send him to Los Alamos. What is it like over there? You got to knock and give a secret code word, or how's it all work?
Well, they have, I'm not sure how to describe it. It's like working for a corporation, I suppose, except there are vaulted doors, and you have to know the combinations, and you have to know there are the kinds of memos and materials that you're reading that are classified. They have to be kept in vaults. If you write anything going through drafts, you have to learn to use what are called burn bags, to tear up your stuff and dispose of it. It's like working for a corporation, except there's a security culture there that you don't have in corporations. You get polygraphed regularly. They strap you in the polygraph.
Really?
And will ask you, even lie to you about, we know you've been doing something like that to try to provoke you, and it can be quite an experience to,
And that's where you studied nuclear weapons?
Yeah, I was the, when I went to the U.S. Air Force Nuclear Weapons Lab, that's where I got my certificate.
Is that your car there?
Is that
your car?
No. I wish it were.
Nice car, yeah.
In nuclear weapons design. But my main goal was not as a technologist working for the agency. Of course, you've got to understand that. And to understand, I was one of the few people who understood Electro-Magnetic-Pulse, for example. I was their senior analyst on that. But the larger and more important thing, was Soviet military doctrine and strategy and operational art. How do they think about future war? How would they fight a future nuclear war? What are the circumstances where these guys think we could get into a nuclear war? How close to the edge do they think they are? Do they share our threat perceptions? Do they have different threat perceptions? Are there different triggers that they have than we would have? And how would they actually execute it? You know,
this is know your enemy under the doctrine.
Yeah, exactly. Knowing their enemy, knowing what their plans are, dissecting that as much as possible. If possible, you know, what role does this missile in this regiment have? What are they going to do with that thing? What is its target in the United States? What are their various nuclear attack options? You know, and so the technology is a small part of this much larger
strategic issue,
strategic understanding of, you know, what is their war plan? How would they fight the war? You know, because as Sun Tzu tells you, you know, I mean, the best strategy, or apart from winning without war, is to understand your enemy's plan, to be able to defeat your enemies.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, sure,
I want to go back a little bit to your book on Israel's nuclear arsenal.
I know, there's so many ways to go.
Did you come under any heat from the Israelis for publishing a book like that?
Not much. I did have I was harassed by one fellow from New York, you know, who misunderstood the book, you know, and he thought it was an attack on Israel, and it wasn't. You know, he and I actually had a long telephone conversation, and I had to explain, explained to him, you know, that this was just an objective treatment of the fact that Israel does have a nuclear arsenal.
Yeah, but to this day, they don't admit that. So
no, of course not. But we need to understand that and what the implications are for our decision-making process. And I didn't take a position in the book. I wanted the book to be objective because there had been a couple of other articles written about Israel, and I believe at least one book written on Israel's nuclear arsenal that was extremely anti-Israel. Okay, so I think his assumption was that anybody who writes a book on Israel's nuclear arsenal is going to be anti-Israeli. You know, but I could I didn't make the case. I didn't take a position for or against. But personally, you know, I think it's entirely understandable that Israel would have a nuclear arsenal, given that they are surrounded by adversaries, and that makes it all the more important, you know, for the United States to, you know, preserve peace in the Middle East, to find ways of reconciling the differences. But if we're going to have since we're a democracy, all right, and we have to make what the American people say and think about these things is important. I thought it was important for the American people to understand that Israel does have a nuclear arsenal, and this is what it probably...
What was the name of the book again? What was the name of it?
Israel's Nuclear Arsenal. And this is probably how many weapons they have. Tom. This is what their delivery systems
Look up,
are
Tom.
like. This is what their capabilities are.
Oh, I've seen that.
So that we could make an assessment, you know, so that we could factor that in to our decisions. And so it was the first objective book about it, and it was one of the things that actually got me into the CIA, you know, because they were sufficiently impressed with the book that, you know, that it helped me.
Did you bring a signed copy for the guys here in the studio?
Well, unfortunately, I regret that I didn't. It's a long time ago that I wrote that. I don't.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Wait, let me say one thing in response to what Damon's talking about. 1986, you wrote this. 224 pages. 1986, you wrote it in English, and it weighs 1.7 pounds being shipped.
Well, it got published in 86. But
Okay,
it was
published.
written before that.
I'm reading The Bomb in the Basement by Michael Karpin, and he's an Israeli. Damon, Israeli law requires that the book be given to the censors, and he fought and fought and fought, but they made him change it. And he says it in the prologue. He says, look, I had disagreements with my brothers and sisters, and I didn't want to use the words apparently or supposedly Israel does, all these qualifying terms, but he had to put them in, and he wanted the readers to know, they're not my words, okay, but I had to put them in. So Israel wants this mystique and this questioning as to what they have and when they have and where they're using. It's kind of bizarre because
everybody knows.
In a sense, they have an alternative, you know, because the U.S. attitude, which I think is mistaken, you know, nuclear weapons, our official policy across Republican and Democrat administrations has been, you know, we don't want anybody else to have nuclear weapons, only in the United States. And you know, we didn't like it when the Brits got nuclear weapons, or the French. We don't make a distinction as to the political philosophy of the state and whether they're a U.S. ally or not and whether it serves their interests. All proliferation is bad. That's the standard liberal arms control philosophy, okay? So Israel really has had no choice. It's had to stay in the closet about its nuclear arsenal because it would risk being punished by the United States, for coming out. And it also has its own, it doesn't want to, by going overt, it could encourage arms racing in the Middle East and provide justification.
That makes sense
for those other countries, but they would pay a huge price for politically with the United States for coming out of the closet. And by the way, I think when it comes to nuclear Iran, this is an example of why it's really important for Americans to understand the history of how Israel got the bomb and the Israeli nuclear arsenal, as well as other countries that went nuclear, like South Africa, like North Korea. But for instance, there's this assumption. Well, I don't want to get as ahead of our conversation, perhaps, but maybe it's an appropriate time to mention it now. There's this assumption that Iran currently today does not have the bomb. And that seems to be because Iran has not tested a bomb, okay? Hasn't lit one off. Well, Israel never tested a bomb. And yet Israel has by all assessments, developed...
They've never physically tested it?
Never physically tested a bomb. There might have been one... Some people have attributed an event that happened in 1979 in the South Atlantic, one of our DSP satellites noticed a nuclear flash. And some people claimed, well, that was the Israeli nuclear test, okay? But nobody knows. It could have been South Africa, it could have been the Russians and Chinese. The official story is that it was actually a mistake, that the DSP satellite, gave erroneous warning on that. And so that's what the official position is. But there's no evidence that Israel has ever conducted a nuclear test. And yet they've managed to develop a very sophisticated nuclear arsenal, including not just atomic weapons, but thermonuclear weapons, nuclear artillery, weapons that can fit on missiles.
What's the difference between, we got a lot to do, we're running low here. Mark, get your question ready. Just a short answer, because you just threw this out. Atomic, thermonuclear, what's the difference?
Well, an atomic bomb, uses uranium or plutonium as fuel. And atomic bombs are much less powerful than thermonuclear weapons, which can be, an atomic bomb, for example, is the kind of bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, 10 kilotons, okay? A thermonuclear weapon can be a megaton, which is 1,000 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb, and it uses tritium as fuel. It uses a different fuel. It's a more sophisticated design. And the Israelis reportedly have thermonuclear weapons as well. And in fact, it's not just reportedly. I mean, here's one of the other incidents that happened when I was at the agency. One of the things that happened, you asked about the reaction. I actually got a call when I was at, well, I think this is okay to talk about because I'm not disclosing sources and records, but I was sitting at my desk at the CIA.
This is actually happened. It may have been a dream you had. But
and I got a call. Let me back up a little. One of the reasons we know so much about Israel's nuclear arsenal now is there was a gentleman named Mordechai Vanunu, who had been involved in the Israeli nuclear weapons program at the Dimona reactor. And he defected to Britain at one time and basically came out with photographs and all kinds of evidence, that proved the sophistication of this arsenal. And then he was lured by a provocative young lady onto a yacht who turned out to be an Israeli agent, and they kidnapped him back into Israel, where he is in jail today. But he was undergoing trial for disclosing these secrets. And I was sitting in the agency headquarters, and I got a phone call from Vanunu's lawyer.
Oh boy!
Who had read my book, and he wanted me to come to Israel to testify on behalf of Vanunu. Wow. Because he said, here you are, when you wrote that book, you were just an undergraduate student up in upstate New York working with library open sources, and you were able to come up with all this information and evidence, and so, so you shouldn't, if Vanunu...
Is that him?
So Vanunu shouldn't have to go to jail either. Yes, that's right. And, So I actually, he didn't know who he was calling, you know, and all the rest.
Oh.
No, he didn't know. He didn't realize.
So you tell your superiors,
you know, and I don't
what do
even know how
with
he got my phone number. I don't know how he got my phone number into the agency.
Did you buy a lottery ticket that day?
Yeah, yeah, man. That's an interesting
They wouldn't
story.
let me go, but they wouldn't let, you know, they wouldn't let me go to Israel to do that, right? Because they felt that once they got me on the staff, they could ask me all kinds of.
Hey, you want to go with us March 12th?
Yeah, we're going to March 12th. Come with us. All right, let's do this.
Yeah.
That's a great story. Mark, yours real fast.
Mine's just a
the
plug.
Slate Magazine doesn't like you too
right.
much, Peter Pry. I want to hear about that.
Mine's just a plug. He has a special. Well, you contributed on this Nat Geo Electronic Armageddon special, which is on. You can actually find it on YouTube, but it really wakes you up to the enormity of the problem, especially because there's 100% chance within our lifetimes that we're going to get hit by this type of magnetic storm. And I really want to go back to that. We talk about Iran, we talk about all that other stuff, but this here is the most critical part of what Dr. Pry is talking about, is this EMP from the sun. Regardless of your political ideology, left, right, liberal, up, down, gay, straight, I don't care. It doesn't matter. The sun doesn't care. We have to be aware on the critical infrastructure problem of our system, of our electric grid because of that. Do you not agree that that is more important even than the Iran issue, Doctor?
Well, I hate to dissent with you. Okay. I don't agree that it's more important than the Iranian nuclear threat.
That's a Slate position too.
Yeah.
Slate Magazine said the natural phenomenon is more serious than the political situation or so. And tell us about that.
Yeah, the reason for this is, you know, while they're both existential threats, no question about that, and the possibility of a Carrington-class superstorm happening, I mean, is inevitable. Okay, so the likelihood is 100%. You know, the Congressional EMP Commission, in the end of the day, when they said, well, should we be protecting mainly, should our focus be on protecting against geomagnetic superstorms or nuclear EMP, they came down on the side of nuclear EMP, even though it may be a much less likely threat, because there are things that nuclear EMP does that natural EMP doesn't do.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and it's a deeper, more energetic threat. And so if you're protected against that, if you're protected against the nuclear EMP threat, it protects against everything else, including
buy
the
one, get one free deal.
But if you only if you protect it against the geomagnetic superstorm, it won't fully.
So if you're going to do it right.
If you're going to do it right. If you're going to do it right, and therefore, you know, that's why the Iranian nuclear threat or anybody's nuclear EMP threat is really the thing we should be focusing on when it comes to protecting our electric grid and critical.
So it's like, do you want
even if
just
consider
collision
it
insurance, or do you
highly
want
unlikely,
Yeah.
it will. You know,
Was
it will
that your
mitigate.
response to the Slate's article?
Well, I have a lot of responses to the Slate article.
Well, we got about 1 minute.
Oh, is that all? Okay.
Well, we're going to have you back, particularly after we find out what the heck's going on with this.
My main response to this article, I was just appalled that one of the authors has served in the Department of Defense in both the Obama and Bush administrations, Sharon Burke, and she was in charge of energy security for the Department of Defense, and yet fundamentally doesn't understand electromagnetic pulse or how serious of a threat it is, and is actually bold enough to write an article that is full of misinformation and mistakes, and that's very disturbing.
That's who's afraid of the
that's
big
my
bad
comment
pulse,
on the article.
yeah.
I guess we'll have to wait. I've written a rebuttal on it. I don't know if Slate will publish it or not.
Oh, I'm sure they will.
Oh yeah, they're all over it right now.
Right.
In fact, I just had him on the phone a minute. No, sorry, that was somebody.
All right, so we got about a minute left, actually a little less than a minute. Take 30 seconds. What do you want to tell the world out there, our listeners on WSBR Radio and the United West? What are your concerns for the future here, right there in that camera?
I think we've made a mistake in putting our trust in arms control. I mentioned earlier that I had worked in the Verification Bureau, and what we're doing with Iran is a repeated mistake that this country has been making, where we put our trust in negotiations and diplomacy. There's a theory, an arms control theory behind all of this called convergence. It was during the Cold War when we thought by diplomacy and negotiation we could create convergence between the United States and the Soviet Union, the evil empire, and eventually reconcile our differences. That didn't work. And it didn't work with North Korea, and it's not going to work with Iran. And we never seem to learn that it doesn't work.
All right, no convergence when you're dealing with an evil empire. Dr. Peter Pry, thank you very, very much.
Thank you
Great
so
to
much
have
for
you
having
in
me.
studio, and we will pick up part 3 with Dr. Peter Pry in the near future. See you.